Hey guys, it's Danconia. Welcome back to the Overwatch League Roundup 2020 Playoffs Weekend Preview. So here we are then. We did the meta preview yesterday, and today we are taking a look ahead at our playoffs. We are finally there. The regular season is over, and we are now looking straight down the barrel of those playoffs and finding out who's going to be on top. Now, first of all, we will be deciding who will be going through to the Final Four, which will be 2 teams from North America and 2 teams from the Asian APAC region. And this is going to be spicy. Obviously, there's 13 teams in North America, and there are 7 in the APAC region. We will be starting a little bit early this week as well, because the playoffs are still constructed of play-ins and playoffs. And so we've got some earlier matches for the lower seeded teams in both regions. And then we move straight into the teams that are more middle of the league in their standings and therefore have a bit more of an advantage going into it. So, we start off on Thursday, September the 3rd at 8 PM British Summer Time with the Boston Uprising taking on the Houston Outlaws. So, this was a massive Pepega Fest earlier in the season, which was 7 maps long with 2 draws in it, and it was a really long match of very bad Overwatch. And yeah, that's all we can say about that. Things have changed since then. I think we can all agree with that. And I think the Houston Outlaws are a definitely better looking team than the Boston Uprising. I'm not expecting the Boston Uprising to have any joy during these playoffs at all. There is no losers bracket after that either. So whoever loses in these matches really does lose. And I don't see anyone else but Houston going through here. So yeah, I think Houston will go through on that one. And then straight after that one at 10 PM-ish on the Thursday will be the Washington Justice taking on the Vancouver Titans. Now this one is slightly more difficult to call, because you've got Big Carry on the Vancouver Titans. He's called Shockwave. Washington Justice now got Decay. They've got Stitch. Tuba is okay. He's okay. That's all I can say. But then they have slightly weaker tanks and stuff like that. So this could be a bit closer than the previous match I was just on about. However, I think there's scope for both teams to go through. I think Washington Justice may have the edge though. And the reason I say that is because I think the Washington Justice DPS, especially Decay, will shut down Shockwave on the Titans. Because Shockwave, he's looked really good on the Echo and he's looked really good on the Widowmaker. And that's 2 things that Decay can shut down, because Decay can just play Widow. And he will own an Echo, and he's very good at taking on a Widow 1v1, as he demonstrated against Ans the other day, actually. Even though he did lose in the end, Ans is much better. And so, I think, in all honesty, Washington Justice will get past the Titans here. I think it will be close. I think Titans have scope to go through. But I have to go with my brain here, and I think the Washington Justice will get a victory over the Titans. But then we move to the Asia region. This will be our play-in for that region. It'll be on Friday, September the 4th at 10 AM. And it will be the London Spitfire taking on the Chengdu Hunters. London Spitfire was 7th seed, Chengdu Hunters 6th seed. Chengdu Hunters had a very good run at the end of the season, where they picked up a lot of wins. It was an ideal meta for them. And the elephant in the room with this is obviously meta, because that could have a very major impact on what we see and how teams perform during these playoffs. Chengdu Hunters, if the meta becomes chaotic, if we see Zarya come back, if we see more Bull or Winston, say we go Winston Bull dive, or Winston Zarya dive, or Bull Zarya dive, if I could ever talk, then this is going to favour Chengdu Hunters massively. If we start seeing Roadhog and things like that, I still think it could really benefit Chengdu, especially if we end up double off tank, because I still think the chaos falls into Chengdu's favour. If we however see more structure to things and stuff like that, I think it starts to drift away from Chengdu slightly. Jinmu can't play that Genji anymore, and yeah, that's all you can say really. London Spitfire. London Spitfire. I never know what to say about that team. If this had been before the Countdown Cup, then I would have said London will probably win this. I think I'm judging that right. No, if this had been before the Summer Showdown, It would have been a London straight win. But then London kind of let us down towards the end of the season. But one thing I have belief in is London's coaching prowess. And one thing you'll always kind of see with London is that they tend to go on a bad run of form at the end of the season, no matter how good they've been playing during the season. And then they decide to try and push for playoffs. And maybe they have been able to do that this season. I still think they... this is a difficult one to call. I think this is the most difficult out of all of the 3 play-ins to call. I don't trust London. I really don't trust London. I'm going to go for a 3-2 for the Chengdu Hunters. I am going to go for the 3-2 for the Chengdu Hunters. Plus, Chengdu Hunters have had another 2 weeks of preparation time because they finished their season after the Countdown Cup, whereas London had a load of matches to play after that. So that could work in Chengdu's favour as well. So I will go for the Chengdu Hunters, but I think it's going to be a real close one. So then we move into the matches that we don't necessarily know about, right? So on the Friday at 8 PM, we move back to North America where we will see the next round of fixtures, where the Los Angeles Gladiators, Atlanta Reign and Dallas Fuel will come into the fray. They will get to pick their opponents out of the remaining opponents left, so that'll be either Boston, Houston, Washington or Vancouver, and then the last seed remaining that we haven't seen yet, which would be the Toronto Defiant. So it's very difficult to predict this because obviously, I mean, a lot of people are predicting it because of the $100,000 prize if you get the bracket completely right. But yeah, this is difficult to call. It depends obviously on what happens in those play-ins. I would expect the Gladiators to pick one of the lesser opponents. I think some people might try and avoid Washington depending on how they perform against Vancouver because of their hit scan prowess. But I wouldn't be surprised if Gladiators were to say, right, come on Houston, let's have a go at you. Or Toronto, and then Atlanta do the same and take the last remaining one, and then maybe we see Dallas take on Washington. I'd love to see Dallas take on Washington, I'm not going to lie. There's a bit of beef there to settle. So it would be really interesting to see that sort of matchup. I still think all of those teams that would be there though, Gladiators, Atlanta, Dallas, I think would go through. I think they've got too much for the teams that would be coming into those slots. The only thing that might be close is if say we saw Houston Outlaws taking on the Dallas Fuel, then that may be scope for a different result. Maybe Dallas is the only team that I have reservations about because, yeah, you know, it's Dallas. And do we trust Dallas to get the job done? Yes, Dallas have won CDL, I believe, but this is a whole different thing. So, yeah, I think Atlanta and Gladiators should be alright. But Dallas is the only question mark, but I would back them to get through. Then we have the next stage of the playoffs in the APAC region. So this will be at 10 AM on Saturday the 5th of September. This will be New York Excelsior and Hangzhou Spark coming into it. Hangzhou Spark will play second, New York Excelsior will play first. And they will play either Seoul Dynasty, or the London Spitfire, or the Chengdu Hunters. Seoul Dynasty are the team that are seeded but won't have to play in the play-ins. And London Spitfire and Chengdu have to wait on that result on the Friday, quite obviously. I would expect the New York Excelsior, being the highest seed, to pick either Chengdu or London, depending on the meta. But I would assume they would go with that because Seoul can be a spicy team in playoffs. We know that from this season. So I would expect New York to pick the winner of the play-ins, and then Hangzhou to get lumped with Seoul Dynasty. And in that case, I think New York go through, and then, unless it's Chengdu, and the meta's weird, and then it might be an upset, but then we get Seoul Hangzhou, which is really, really, really difficult to call. Really difficult. Two teams that have got a very high skill ceiling in my opinion, but also have had very big lows. So that's a tough one. That is a real tough one. I would probably back Seoul at that point because of their prowess during playoffs this season. But we've also seen Hangzhou get to the final of a tournament as well. So it is a very difficult one to call, but I would go with Seoul for that one. But then we switch back to North America where we see the big boys come in this time around. Where at 8 PM we will see the Philadelphia Fusion come in, at 10 PM we will see the Florida Mayhem come in, at midnight we will see the San Francisco Shock, and at 2 AM we will see the Paris Eternal. So this, I think, again, NA pretty clear cut. Philadelphia should get past whatever opponent they go up against, I would hope. Philadelphia have got a lot of quality, and they should be able to see past what they go up against. The Florida Mayhem is a bit of a different thing. Florida Mayhem could be taken close by someone like the Los Angeles Gladiators, although they did prove in the last week of the season that they can beat the Gladiators, and they beat them 3-1. So, I would still back the Mayhem to get through, but I think they have potential to be upset. Then we have the San Francisco Shock. I would expect the San Francisco Shock to get past any opponent they face. They should have too much quality for the people coming up from the lower part of the bracket. And then the Paris Eternal. The Paris Eternal is, again, some teams that is a team that I have some reservations about in terms of their ability to adapt. We've seen Sparkle pop off on Genji. We know Sparkle can pop off on Doomfist. But can he do everything? Not sure. Will we go into a meta where we'll see more soon in Exi? Will that work? So there's a few questions over the Paris Eternal. But they should have enough quality, again, to get through. Because Florida Mayhem are the last seed and therefore won't have the ability to pick. Whereas the Paris Eternal will have the ability to pick from 2 remaining teams that go through. And I would imagine they will take the team they can think they can beat. Or beat the easiest anyway. So that's where I would go with that. We move back then to the Asian region. And then we see the last 2 teams come back in. So at 10 AM on Sunday we'll see the Shanghai Dragons. And at 12 PM on the Sunday we will see Guangzhou Charge. The top 2 teams in Asia as of the Asian standings. And I don't think anyone has any doubts that Shanghai will be the favourites to go through to the Final 4. And the winners of these matches will go through to the Final 4. So, it's a difficult one. It's a difficult one. I think Shanghai go through, but then Guangzhou Charge would probably be up against Seoul if Seoul go through, or Hangzhou, because Shanghai I think would take New York. Or maybe no, Shanghai would take Hangzhou if Hangzhou went through, and then you'd have Guangzhou, New York, which in that case I think New York would go through if they get to go against Guangzhou. However, if it's Seoul that goes through, I think it would be Seoul against Guangzhou, and then the water gets a little murky. Then it gets a little murky. I'm not sure. I think it would be Shanghai Seoul at that point, in all honesty. But it would heavily depend on what happens in that Seoul-Hangzhou match. Because if Seoul go out early and Hangzhou go through, I think Shanghai will pick Hangzhou, and then New York gets Guangzhou, and I think New York beats Guangzhou. And then New York will get the 2nd spot in North America. In APAC, I should say. So it's really difficult to predict this. But that's kind of my thoughts on that right now. Moving back to North America, and then we will be having a bunch of not only round 4 or 5 fixtures, but we'll also be having the losers bracket fixtures as well, where we will see maybe teams like the Valiant come in. Obviously, the Valiant will come in round 3 when Philadelphia Fusion, Mayhem, Shock, and Gladiators come in as being the reigning seed, and the Valiant could cause some upsets, especially if the meta goes down the way of Ashe and Tracer. It could be that Valiant cause some upsets. I will show you my bracket in a minute. It's slightly spicy. But so we go through that. I would expect Fusion and Shock to go through really in their round 4 ties against whoever they play, like Paris or Gladiators or Mayhem or Valiant, depending on who goes through. So I'd expect them to go through. And then in the losers bracket, I'd expect teams like Paris, Florida, or Gladiators to come out on top in the end. But in my predictions, I end up with the San Francisco Shock and the Philadelphia Fusion going to the finals. Now, I think it's much more difficult. The earlier stages for me in NA are much easier to define. When you get much further down the line, I think it becomes a lot more difficult. And honestly, I could see 4 teams, maybe 5 teams exchanging places in the grand final spots. But I still have a very significant feeling that the Philadelphia Fusion will be one of those teams. More than anyone else, to be quite honest. I've had a significant feeling all season that the San Francisco Shock might not be the team that wins this season, even though people will rate them very highly, obviously because of their previous year championship winning season. But there are teams in the back lines, like Paris, like Florida, like Gladiators, who are on a good run of form, maybe even Valiant, that could cause some upsets. And so I don't think North America is as defined as perhaps the APAC region is, where I would expect the Shanghai Dragons to roll through. And then it's just a case of fighting out for that second spot. And I don't think Guangzhou are looking as good as they were, especially with their lack of flexibility, with Krong kind of, I don't want to say he's a Sigma 1 trick, but he's very much stronger on Sigma than anything else. Hangzhou have been up and down, Seoul have been up and down, so I'm not too sure about those two. And I think the consistency of the New York Excelsior will come out on top, so that's why I said Shanghai and New York generally, or Shanghai and Seoul. And when it comes to NA, I think it's a little bit less clear-cut for the final two. I think there's 4 teams that could go in, but I really do think Fusion are going to be one of those teams to go. I think they've got a very high skill ceiling, the Fusion, and I think it contributes well to them. So yeah, it's going to be super, super interesting. I probably by now put my bracket on the screen, and you've all got a chance yourselves to do these sorts of brackets, and I wish you all the best, obviously, in that little competition, which is a really cool thing for the Overwatch League to do. And I think, nonetheless, we are in store for some very, very interesting Overwatch. It's going to be interesting to see what meta the teams are going to play. Whether they end up falling into the comp meta that we've seen, which I seem to have doubts about, or they end up just going straight down the route of doing a bubble meta and doing their own thing and having dive or something like that, just not valuing the hog, which I have suspicions they might do. So it's going to be super, super interesting to see how that pans out. But I'm going to leave it here for this one. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you'd like to give it a like, subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you in the next video. See you then.